Let's talk about some of the buzz phrases that we, or at least I, often come across, especially online. Much of what I'm going to say today, it will be contradicting views that I've had in the past, and I love that. I think it's so exciting when you start viewing something differently. When facts change, I change my mind. John Maynard Keynes said that. This conversation was inspired by a series of events in my life and a series of people that I've met. It was inspired by my grandmother. She was the most selfless person that I'd ever met, so much that it would annoy me at times out of love. I did not want her to give so much of herself, but it also inspired me and will continue to inspire me for the rest of my life. I was inspired by other people from her generation and people I've been around, as well as my parents' generation. Now, I'm not going to advocate and say that things were better before, back then. Some things were and some things were not. And this conversation was also inspired by my own observations, both online and in everyday life and culture overall. I've just noticed people becoming, increasingly flaky, careless, and selfish, and often under the guise of self-love and having boundaries and prioritizing oneself. It seems that we are encouraging things like cutting people off, ghosting, because we don't owe anyone anything, and we're going to talk about that, rather than encouraging things like giving grace, patience, and forgiveness. Selfishness is on trend, and by the way, I am chronically online, keep that in mind. I do think that part of what we're seeing and experiencing today, especially with newer generations like Gen Z, is a reaction or an overcorrection to previous generations. We may look at our parents, our grandparents, relatives, whoever, and think that they accepted too much. They were too passive, codependent, didn't prioritize themselves and their own well-being and happiness, and perhaps they did that under the guise of things like selflessness, grace, forgiveness, and so perhaps you swore to yourself that you would never become that. We may look at ourselves or our friends, and perhaps you tried the whole giving grace and being forgiving, only to end up getting screwed over again and again and again. Perhaps your selfless acts were taken for granted, and with enough screw-overs, you can enter the territory of misanthropy, the dislike of humankind. And now your walls are up, and even the slightest signs of someone mistreating you will result in you cutting them off. No more letting anyone walk all over you, no more trying to be understanding only to be disappointed again, no more giving grace only to be taken for granted. Perhaps you won't even let anyone in anymore, at least not close, because why risk hurting yourself? It's simply not worth it to you. Solitude is dangerous. It's very addictive. It becomes a habit after you realize how calm and peaceful it is. It's like you don't want to deal with people anymore because they drain your energy. Jim Carrey said that. I would like to talk about cutting people off, but before sharing my personal experience, let's go over some of the reasons for cutting people off, and this is from psychology.org. Personal boundaries. The person is repeatedly violating or disrespecting your personal boundaries. Toxic relationships. There is an unhealthy dynamic like emotional abuse, manipulation, or consistent conflict. Growing apart. You simply grow apart. Your values are different, or your interests are, and you once had an emotional connection, but there isn't enough there anymore to sustain the relationship. Repetitive betrayals. This could be lies, broken promises, things that erode trust. Emotional stress. The relationship is causing too much emotional stress. You feel anxious, depressed, constantly feeling unease. There's too much of an emotional burden. Protecting mental health. This one is kind of similar to the previous one. Basically, the relationship is causing too much stress, anxiety, or even trauma, and it's taking a toll on you, and so you just need to protect your mental well-being. Incompatibility. You're just not compatible anymore. You may have different goals, values, communication styles, things that make it difficult to understand one another and to make it work. Conflict resolution is unattainable. You just cannot mend the relationship. Due to conflicts or whatever you've gone through, it's become too much and the relationship is just no longer fixable. Feeling overwhelmed. Perhaps this person is making you feel suffocated. They expect too much, they have needs and demands that you simply cannot or don't want to live up to. They don't go to therapy. I'm kidding, that's not actually on the list, although there's definitely been times where I've been like, if only this person had signed up to BetterHelp, perhaps things would have turned out differently. Yes, this part of the video is in paid partnership with BetterHelp, the platform that connects you with a therapist who is trained to listen and to give you helpful, unbiased advice. Over 4 million people have used BetterHelp to start living a healthier, happier life. For me personally, opening up about some of my past relationships and concerns in therapy has given me clarity and the tools that I've needed to navigate certain situations. And now therapy is not a cure, it's not like oh, here's exactly what you need to do to make your life perfect type of thing. It's a place that can help you view situations in a different light, and that alone has been tremendously helpful for me personally. With BetterHelp, there's also no hassle to get started. You can use the link in my description box or go to betterhelp.com/Lana. You fill out a questionnaire to assess your specific needs, and then in most cases, you'll be matched with a therapist within 48 hours or less. And if you're matched with a therapist and you're not vibing, you can easily switch to a different therapist at no additional cost. To try out BetterHelp, click the link in my description box or visit betterhelp.com/Lana. Clicking that link helps support this channel, and it also gets you 10% off your first month at BetterHelp, so you can connect with a therapist and see if it helps you. Now, back to talking about cutting people off. I think the above list that I mentioned pretty much covers the reasons for why I have personally decided to cut ties with people. And I'll admit, I have found it's become strangely easy for me to do so. But I do still think it's something that should not be taken lightly, even though it is sometimes necessary. I would be wary of treating people as if they were disposable, and I would be wary of how much you're letting social media or other online forums or mediums or just people in general influence your decision making. I think the online climate has become very rough in this regard. I'll often see words like problematic, toxic, controlling, and abuse being thrown around so carelessly. As an example, I one time saw a video of a girl. She had painted her nails red, and she said that she painted them red because her boyfriend liked it when she had red nail polish. And so many people in the comments said that he was being controlling and she should decide for herself and not try to satisfy him, and so on. And I've seen so many similar instances, some a lot more serious than nail polish, where someone will share like a personal problem, something that they're going through, and they will wonder, what should I do? And the comments so often overwhelmingly encourage people to walk out, to cut ties, to move on, while the people who encourage reconciliation, working things through, and trying to be understanding are often the minority. And look, sometimes it's absolutely warranted. Sometimes I too will read something or see something and I'll sit there and be like, what is this person even contemplating? Obviously, they should cut ties with that person immediately. Sometimes things really are black and white, at least I think so. But I want to become better at least giving that gray area some thought, of strengthening my rational thinking rather than my emotional thinking, of not immediately categorizing situations as either or. No one is perfect, we're all flawed somehow, and deep connections are very rare to come by. And so a decision to let one go should not be taken lightly. People are not disposable and shouldn't be treated as such, but sometimes they already treated you as such, and you just did the cutting part, in which case, all power to you. You don't owe anyone anything. One of the most alarming ideas that I see being thrown around is the idea that we don't owe anyone anything. And now I know. Come at me in the comments, I deserve it, because I have said this probably on multiple occasions. And in part, I do stand by it still, but let me explain. Now first, let's look at the definition of the word owe. So obviously we have the having an obligation to pay or repay something, especially money, in return for something received. Or, and this is more relevant in this case, be under a moral obligation to give someone gratitude, respect, etc. And this sentiment is often used to, give people permission to not do something that they don't want to do. Now, here are some examples. You go on a date with someone and they pay for the date, and it's a nice gesture and it should be done because they genuinely wanted to do that, not because they expect some sort of transaction. And it does not mean that you now owe them a second date or any level of intimacy, for example. Another example, you're in a relationship. It doesn't mean that either of you have some sort of ownership over the other person, where, for example, you owe them sex. Another example, you make more money than all your friends, and so you don't owe to treat them for dinner or activities. Another example, someone did something nice to you. It does not mean that you owe it to like them or to want to be friends with them. Final example, your parents birthed you, raised you. It does not mean that you owe to them to obey all of their commands and live their dream instead of yours. Now, all these examples I agree with, but technically, we can take this really far, right? Because you don't really owe anyone much, if anything. You don't owe it to say thank you when someone helps you, or to say hello to the cashier, or to help the old lady who is looking lost at the bus station, or to explain to your partner why you are leaving them, or to not play music loudly at the subway, or to stay in line, or to sleep with a married person. In fact, you don't have to be nice, helpful, understanding, grateful, or polite at all. None of these things are going to get you in legal trouble, and you can probably get away with doing or not doing most of it. And this is obviously an exaggeration, and most people don't behave, absolutely recklessly and inconsiderately. But I do think that it can be a slippery slope. I think that if you do indulge yourself deeply in this mindset of not owing anyone anything, you could easily end up becoming, in fact, inconsiderate. And I mean, can you imagine a society where everyone cares only about themselves and not about anyone else? It just sounds very dystopian to me. Just because you don't have to do something, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't. Now, I do think that this mantra of not owing anyone anything can be necessary for all of us in some circumstances. People pleasers, I'm looking at you. But let's not lose sight of basic human dignity. I would like to think that while I may not owe anyone anything, and I don't necessarily even like that word because it sounds very transactional to me, I want to live as if I do until, if and when, someone gives me a reason not to. As a collective, I think we should want to impose as little harm and suffering on others as we can. And if we can do that by, for example, explaining ourselves instead of leaving someone wondering, or helping someone even if it's slightly inconvenient, or carefully wording something or because we know that that person is fragile, even if we don't have to do any of these things, I think we should choose to do so if we can do it safely, comfortably, enthusiastically. Very important for me to say, your safety, your well-being will always come first. Always. You're not a bad person for choosing that above all else. The goal is a society in which the basic social unit is you and your television set. If the kid next door is hungry, it's not your problem. If the retired couple next door invested their assets badly and are starving, that's not your problem either. Now let's talk about self-care. Protect your peace. I say, I've said this so many times and I'm probably going to continue saying it, but has it started to mean something else? Something that started as a healthy, good reminder to people to not overextend themselves, to care for themselves, to set healthy boundaries, to not let people walk all over you, seems to have swung too far in the other direction. I've talked to some friends about this, and it kind of feels like, you don't want to complain to your friends because you don't want to give other people bad energy. And you also don't want others to give you bad energy or negative energy. And you don't want to talk too much about your breakup because you're afraid that your friends will get tired of it. And you also don't want to listen to your friend talk about theirs because you've got stuff to do. And you have to sort of accept that people cancel plans and they don't respond for 5 days because you want to give them space. And you want others to understand you when you do that as well. We don't want to waste anyone's precious time and energy, and we don't want anyone to waste ours. And now look, all of this is kind of valid. We're busy. Everything is getting super expensive, time is limited, our family is counting on us, anxiety and depression are increasing, we're tired. Anyway, I don't think it has to be either or. We're not going to collapse if we give our friend a listening ear, or if we skip the eye patches for one night and actually show up to the dinner that we booked a month ago. And also, if everything feels like an obligation all the time, if you constantly feel like you are canceling, flaking, making up excuses, putting your phone on silent, disappearing, not showing up, you may be in the wrong circles. Or you may be suffering from main character syndrome. On BetterHelp's website, main character syndrome is described as not an actual mental health disorder. Instead, it is a term used to describe someone who often sees themselves as the main character in their life story. And by the way, what is the difference between main character syndrome and main character energy? I feel like the former is used as something more negative and the latter as something more positive. But I don't know. Anyway, when I think of it positively, I think of a person who makes the most out of a person who makes the most out of each moment in life, even the small things. So, okay, in a sympathetic and respectful manner. I think of a person, for example, at a concert who is fully immersed. They're moving their body to every tone. They are singing along. They're completely letting go. They're being fully present. It's almost like the concert is just for them and the singer without bothering anyone else. They're not throwing their arms in other people's faces. They're just being there in their bubble, having an unforgettable time. That, I think, is main character energy in a positive way. Now, when I think of it in a less positive way, I think of when it leads to inconsiderate, obnoxious behavior. Like when you expect people at the gym, and I've seen this so much on TikTok, where I'm chronically at, where you expect people at the gym to accommodate you and tailor their workout so that they are not bothering you or disrupting your video, where your main concern is your video, making sure that you look good, with little to no care about everyone else, with little to no care about the fact that most people at that gym are probably already tired from work. They just want to get a sweat in and go back home and rest. And now I guess you could argue this in a million ways, right? You could perhaps say that, well, maybe the person who is filming this TikTok does it for a living, and perhaps the people at the gym could simply make a tiny bit of effort to not walk into frame. And now I will say this, as someone who does in fact create content for a living, whenever it's possible and not too inconvenient, I very much appreciate it when I notice people waiting for a second or walking behind me when they see that I'm trying to get a shot of something. But also, isn't that just common courtesy? I don't know. What do you think about all this? What do you do when you see someone like taking a photo? Do you just not care and walk straight in front of them? Do you wait? Do you snatch their camera and run away? Let me know in the comments. Now, I have learned a new word this year, and I think it's the perfect way to end this video or end this conversation. And the word is sonder. I found this beautiful definition of it, and here it is. The realization that each random passerby is living a life as vivid and complex as your own, populated with their own ambitions, friends, routines, worries, and inherited craziness. An epic story that continues invisibly around you like an anthill sprawling deep underground with elaborate passageways to thousands of other lives that you will never know existed, in which you might appear only once, as an extra sipping coffee in the background, as a blur of traffic passing on the highway, as a lighted window at dusk.